Most people believe the world was built carefully, slowly, with great planning. But many of the things you use every single day were never meant to exist at all. They were born in panic, created in darkness, whispered into history during moments when survival mattered more than perfection. Tonight, as you rest, let me tell you how medieval emergencies quietly shaped the modern world, forever. The medieval world was not designed for comfort. It was a place where night fell early, winters lingered too long, and danger was rarely announced before it arrived. People did not invent systems because they wanted progress. They invented them because something had gone terribly wrong. In the narrow streets of medieval towns, emergencies were not rare events. They were daily companions. Fire could erupt from a single candle. Disease could move faster than any messenger. Hunger, cold, and fear shaped decisions far more than ambition ever did. And yet, it was inside these moments of desperation that some of the most lasting habits of human civilization were quietly formed. When a medieval city caught fire, there were no fire departments. No sirens. No trained professionals. Instead, bells rang, not to celebrate, but to warn. Entire neighborhoods would wake at once, forming human chains to pass buckets of water from wells and rivers. The system was crude, exhausting, and often ineffective. But it taught something essential. Emergencies required shared responsibility. Over time, these bucket brigades became organized. Specific citizens were assigned roles. Tools were stored in common places. And eventually, centuries later, this panic-born cooperation evolved into formal fire brigades, fire codes, and urban planning rules that still dictate how cities are built today. The medieval world did not plan for safety. It stumbled into it. Inside stone houses, windows were small and narrow, not for beauty, but for defense and heat retention. Glass was rare and expensive. Light was precious. Air was limited. These cramped spaces trapped smoke, smells, and illness. People began opening doors at specific times of day. They learned when fresh air reduced sickness, even if they did not understand germs. These habits slowly turned into routines. Routines became customs. And customs became the foundations of ventilation, building design, and public health practices long before science had names for them. In monasteries, silence was not spiritual at first, it was practical. Too much noise disrupted copying manuscripts. Too much conversation spread rumors, arguments, and distraction. Silence reduced conflict. Reduced errors. Reduced danger. What began as an emergency fix for order and focus became the basis for libraries, study halls, hospitals, and modern expectations of quiet shared spaces. Medieval doctors did not wash their hands because they understood bacteria. They washed because bad smells were believed to cause illness. Yet the result was the same. Cleaner hands meant fewer deaths. Over generations, the ritual remained, even as the reason was forgotten. Not every emergency fix worked. Many failed. Many killed. But a few survived, not because they were perfect, but because they helped people live one more day. And in the medieval world, surviving one more day was everything. As night settled over stone villages, people locked doors not because of crime statistics, but because wolves, soldiers, and strangers traveled after dark. The habit of closing, barring, and securing entrances became instinct. Eventually, locks improved. Keys standardized. Privacy became expected. From fear came routine. From routine came tradition. From tradition came the invisible structure of modern life. Most medieval people never knew they were shaping the future. They were simply reacting, fixing problems as best they could, hoping morning would come. And quietly, it always did. As medieval nights grew quieter, danger did not disappear. It only changed its shape. In the darkness beyond town walls, disease moved silently. There were no announcements, no warnings. People noticed it first in small ways, one neighbor coughing too long, another failing to wake in the morning. Panic followed quickly, because there was no cure, no explanation, only fear. When sickness spread, medieval towns reacted with what they had, distance. Not understanding infection, they still understood pattern. Those who stayed close to the sick often fell ill themselves. So they separated. They closed doors. They marked homes. Entire families were shut inside their own houses, not out of cruelty, but desperation. This was the origin of quarantine. The word itself would come later, but the behavior was born in emergency. 40 days. Enough time, they believed, for danger to pass. Ships were kept offshore. Travelers waited beyond gates. Markets slowed. Life paused. These measures were imperfect, harsh, and sometimes deadly. Yet they worked just well enough to survive. Centuries later, modern public health would rediscover the same idea, refined but familiar, during moments of crisis that felt strangely medieval. Inside the city walls, food emergencies were constant. Harvests failed. Winters stretched longer than expected. Grain spoiled. Hunger arrived without mercy. So towns began storing food communally. Not as charity, but as strategy. Granaries were locked, guarded, and carefully rationed. Bread was weighed. Prices were controlled. Bakers were watched closely. From these moments of starvation came food regulation, storage laws, and the concept of emergency reserves. What began as survival became policy. Policy became expectation. Even today, governments quietly maintain grain reserves, emergency stockpiles, and price controls, echoes of medieval hunger still shaping modern economics. In crowded streets, waste piled quickly. Animals wandered freely. Water sources grew foul. People fell sick again and again, unable to understand why. So they made rules. Not scientific ones, practical ones. Waste was thrown at certain times. Certain streets were avoided. Wells were protected. Slaughterhouses were pushed to the edges of town. These were not environmental movements. They were emergency reactions. But over time, they formed the earliest systems of sanitation, zoning, and public cleanliness. The medieval city was teaching itself how not to die. At night, watchmen walked the streets carrying lanterns. Not to see clearly, but to be seen. Their presence alone calmed fear. They called the hours aloud, reminding people that time was still moving, that order remained. This was not law enforcement as we know it. It was reassurance. The sound of a human voice in darkness. From these night watches came policing, patrols, timekeeping, and the expectation that someone, somewhere, was responsible for the safety of the sleeping. Even the way people organized time itself came from urgency. Church bells rang not just for prayer, but for coordination. Work began and ended by sound. Emergencies were announced the same way. Time became shared. Shared time allowed shared action. And shared action allowed survival. Inside homes, furniture was minimal. Beds were shared. Privacy was rare. Yet during illness or childbirth, separation became necessary. Curtains were hung. Screens were placed. Temporary boundaries appeared. These fragile divisions slowly evolved into rooms, wards, and personal space. What started as emergency separation became the blueprint for modern interiors. Medieval life did not invent comfort. It accidentally discovered function. Every solution was temporary. Every fix was rushed. Yet the ones that worked lingered, passed down not through books, but habit. Parents taught children not because they understood why, but because it had worked before. And when morning came, and bells rang again, the world continued, changed slightly, quietly, without anyone noticing. Most medieval people never believed they were shaping the future. They believed only in making it through the night. And somehow, they did. War never arrived suddenly in the medieval world. It lingered first as rumor. Travelers spoke quietly at taverns. Merchants avoided certain roads. Lords gathered men not for attack, but protection. And by the time people understood what was coming, it was already too late to escape. When armies moved, cities reacted with speed, not wisdom. Gates closed. Names were written down. Strangers were questioned. Some were turned away, others imprisoned, not for crimes, but for uncertainty. In these moments of fear, identity became essential. People began carrying letters, seals, and symbols that proved who they were and where they belonged. A mark from a lord, a monastery, or a guild could mean the difference between shelter and death. These makeshift systems were never designed to last, yet they formed the earliest roots of identification papers, permits, and legal identity itself. Trust had to be proven quickly, or not at all. Inside the walls, money became unstable. Coins were clipped, shaved, forged. During war, trust in currency collapsed faster than buildings. So towns weighed coins. They tested metal. They stamped new marks over old ones. Value shifted from appearance to verification. From this chaos came the foundations of standardized currency, banking trust, and financial regulation. Not because people wanted complexity, but because chaos was worse. In battlefield camps, medieval surgeons faced impossible choices. Wounded men arrived faster than they could be treated. Supplies ran out. Time vanished. So they made decisions that would haunt them. Who could be saved quickly? Who might survive with care? Who would die regardless? This was not compassion. It was necessity. From these brutal moments came triage, the prioritization of care under pressure. The system was crude, painful, and often wrong. Yet it allowed some to live where none would have before. Centuries later, emergency rooms would repeat the same logic under bright lights, unaware of its dark medieval origin. As wars dragged on, food shortages returned. Armies consumed everything. Civilians starved quietly. To control chaos, authorities imposed laws, strict ones. Rationing. Curfews. Punishment for hoarding. These were not moral laws. They were emergency rules meant to prevent collapse. Yet once order returned, many of these controls remained. Law learned that fear was effective. Structure lingered long after danger passed. Medieval law did not grow from justice. It grew from panic management. Inside besieged cities, information was more dangerous than weapons. Rumors could spark riots. Panic could open gates faster than armies. So speech was controlled. Messengers were watched. Words became regulated. From this fear of disorder came censorship, controlled messaging, and official announcements. Power learned that controlling information meant controlling survival. Even medical knowledge moved slowly, guarded closely. Successful treatments were hidden, protected, or passed only within guilds. Not out of greed, but survival. Knowledge was leverage. These closed circles eventually evolved into licensing, professional standards, and institutional authority. The medieval world did not trust freely. It learned to trust selectively. And as war passed, as ruins settled into memory, the emergency systems remained. Not because anyone chose them, but because no one dared remove what had once saved them. The world after war felt different. Heavier. More controlled. More organized. And people adapted, as they always had. They slept behind locked doors. They carried proof of who they were. They accepted rules they did not understand, because rules felt safer than chaos. The medieval night grew quieter, but never truly peaceful. Yet still, morning came. Fire was the great equalizer of the medieval world. Stone buildings survived it. Wooden ones vanished in minutes. Cities burned often. Not because of war, but because of daily life. A cooking flame tipped. A candle fell. A hearth breathed too strongly. Wind carried sparks across rooftops before anyone could shout a warning. When fire came, there was no time for debate. People reacted with instinct. Neighbors broke doors. Walls were torn down to create gaps. Entire homes were destroyed on purpose to stop the spread. This desperate act, sacrificing one structure to save many, felt wrong, yet it worked. From this panic was born the idea that destruction could be preventative. Over time, cities began planning for fire before it arrived. Streets widened. Roof materials changed. Storage of water became mandatory. Fire laws were never about order. They were about fear remembered. These early rules evolved slowly into building codes, zoning regulations, and urban planning. Modern cities still carry the shape of medieval flames within their design. As fires injured many, care became urgent. Religious houses opened their doors. Not as hospitals, but as shelters. The sick were separated from the healthy. The dying were given quiet corners. The wounded were laid on straw floors. This was not medicine. It was containment. Yet from this need to separate came the first hospitals, places not to cure, but to manage suffering. Over centuries, knowledge entered these spaces. Treatment improved. But the structure remained. Hospitals were born not from healing, but from emergency organization. With fire, war, and disease repeating endlessly, people sought ways to soften loss. Guilds collected coins. Families supported each other. If a workshop burned, others helped rebuild. If a craftsman died, his children were fed. This mutual aid was not charity. It was survival insurance. From these informal promises emerged insurance systems, shared risk, and financial safety nets. Modern insurance still mirrors medieval logic: many contribute so that few may recover. Nothing about it was gentle. It was practical. As emergencies repeated, memory became valuable. Towns began writing things down. Not stories, but facts. Who owned what? Who owed whom? Which buildings had burned before? Which families carried debt? Records were not about history. They were about prevention. Written memory reduced argument. Reduced confusion. Reduced violence. From this need grew bureaucracy, documentation, and the quiet power of paperwork. Medieval people did not trust memory. They trusted ink. As systems multiplied, so did officials. Fire wardens. Health watchers. Grain counters. Timekeepers. These roles were not prestigious. They were exhausting. Often dangerous. But they created something new: responsibility without nobility. Authority shifted slowly from birth to function. This transformation changed the world more than any battle. Inside homes, people adapted again. Fireplaces moved. Kitchens separated. Tools were stored with care. Households learned to anticipate disaster before it arrived. Preparation became habit. And habit became tradition. The medieval world, once ruled by reaction, began leaning, quietly, toward prevention. People still feared the night. Still locked doors. Still listened for bells. But beneath that fear was something new. A fragile sense of control. As the medieval world learned to prevent disaster, it also learned something quieter. Chaos was exhausting. Constant reaction drained people more than hunger or cold. So slowly, almost unconsciously, they began organizing life itself, not for progress, but for relief. Work became predictable out of necessity. Fields were tended at certain hours. Workshops opened and closed by bells. Breaks were shared. Not because people valued routine, but because emergencies were easier to manage when everyone moved together. From this shared rhythm came the modern workday. It was not designed for efficiency. It was designed so people would know where others were when something went wrong. Children, once taught only at home, were gathered together. Not to educate them deeply, but to keep them supervised while adults worked or defended towns. Monasteries and guild halls became places of instruction. This was not schooling as we imagine it. It was containment and continuity. Yet from this practical need grew education systems, standardized teaching, and the expectation that learning happened in structured spaces. Contracts emerged not from trust, but from its absence. Verbal promises failed under pressure. Memory faded. People argued. So agreements were written. Witnessed. Sealed. Not because people were dishonest, but because crisis revealed how fragile trust could be. These documents reduced conflict. Reduced violence. Reduced uncertainty. From this fear of disagreement came modern contracts, legal obligations, and professional accountability. Time itself became divided. Days segmented. Weeks named. Deadlines created. Not for productivity, but for coordination. Knowing when something must happen prevented panic. Calendars were emergency tools before they were planning tools. Markets followed rules. Measures standardized. Prices watched. Not to encourage fairness, but to prevent riots. Fairness came later. As routines stabilized, trust shifted again. People trusted systems more than individuals. Bells, documents, schedules, and roles became reliable in ways humans were not. This trust was quiet. Invisible. It allowed people to sleep. Even rest became regulated. Curfews enforced silence. Night hours protected the fragile balance of order. Sleep was no longer just personal, it was communal. A sleeping town was a safer town. These systems did not feel oppressive at first. They felt comforting. Familiar. Predictable. People stopped asking why certain things were done. They simply did them. As their parents had. As their neighbors did. Emergency solutions hardened into tradition. And tradition became invisible. By the time the medieval world began to fade into something else, these systems were already permanent. They no longer felt like responses to fear. They felt like life. When the medieval world finally loosened its grip on fear, it did not let go of its habits. Wars ended. Cities rebuilt. Knowledge expanded. And yet, the emergency fixes remained, quietly woven into everyday life. People still locked their doors at night, even when wolves were gone. They still trusted paper over memory. They still accepted rules that had once been born in panic. No one announced that these systems would stay forever. They simply did. Fire codes evolved into building laws. Quarantine became public health. Watchmen turned into police. Granaries became reserves. Contracts replaced handshakes. Schedules ruled days. Bells became clocks. The sound of urgency faded, but the structure it created stayed behind. Modern life feels orderly because it was shaped in disorder. We live inside systems designed for crisis, even when no crisis is visible. We follow routines meant to prevent chaos we have never personally seen. And because they work, we rarely question them. Hospitals still separate the sick. Schools still group children by age and time. Workdays still follow shared rhythms. Identification still proves belonging. Insurance still spreads loss. Records still outlive memory. These things feel natural because fear taught them persistence. The medieval people who created these fixes never imagined us. They were not building the future. They were surviving the present. Yet survival has a long memory. And so, centuries later, as night falls and the world grows quiet, we still move through structures built by people who feared the dark more than we do. Their panic became our normal. Their emergency became our routine. And their quiet, imperfect solutions continue to hold the world together, gently, invisibly, every single day. As you rest now, remember this softly. The world you live in was not designed in peace. It was shaped in moments when people were simply trying to make it through the night. And somehow, they did. So now, you can sleep. Long after the medieval world disappeared from maps, it remained inside people. Not as memory, but as instinct. When something feels uncertain today, we reach for order without thinking. We make lists. We create rules. We close borders. We measure time more tightly. We demand proof. We prepare, even when preparation feels unnecessary. This reflex is old. It was learned in candlelight, under stone ceilings, during winters that did not end and nights that felt endless. The medieval mind learned that survival depended not on bravery, but on structure. On doing the same thing again and again, even when it no longer made sense. And so repetition became safety. We still repeat. We stand in lines. We wait our turn. We trust systems we do not understand. We feel uneasy when schedules break, when routines collapse, when silence lasts too long. This unease is not modern anxiety. It is inherited caution. The medieval world taught humanity that chaos arrives quietly. That danger rarely announces itself. And that the best defense is preparation disguised as normal life. That is why emergency systems never fully disappear after danger passes. Removing them feels like inviting darkness back in. So they stay. They soften. They modernize. They hide behind convenience and tradition. But their purpose remains unchanged. To keep fear manageable. To keep panic distant. To keep the night survivable. Even rest itself has become organized. We sleep in designated spaces. At designated times. Behind locks and walls and laws designed centuries ago to protect dreaming bodies from sudden harm. Sleep is no longer just rest. It is trust. Trust that the systems built in fear will continue to work while we are unaware. And they usually do. That is their quiet triumph. The medieval people who created these structures never knew peace the way we imagine it. Yet they built something that allows us to experience it. Their lives were short. Their knowledge incomplete. Their solutions imperfect. But their instincts were strong. And those instincts still hold the world steady, gently, while you rest. So if the world feels strangely ordered, if rules feel invisible yet firm, if routine feels comforting in ways you cannot explain, it is because somewhere in history, long ago, someone was afraid. And instead of giving in to fear, they made a small decision that helped them survive the night. That decision is still here. Holding the dark back. Letting morning come. And now, as your breathing slows and your thoughts grow quieter, you are doing exactly what they hoped you could one day do. Sleep. Safely. Without needing to know why. Eventually, even fear grows tired. The medieval world lived with danger so closely that, over time, it learned something unexpected. Constant alertness could not last forever. The body needed rest. The mind needed quiet. So people learned to trust what they had built. They trusted the walls, even when they were cracked. They trusted the bells, even when they rang late. They trusted routines, even when they no longer remembered why they existed. Trust was not optimism. It was exhaustion finding peace. This is how emergency systems truly became permanent. Not because they were perfect, but because they allowed people to stop thinking about danger for a while. And when humans can stop thinking about danger, they sleep. Centuries later, we still do the same. We trust locks we have never tested. We trust roads we did not build. We trust laws written by hands long turned to dust. We trust that someone, somewhere, is watching the night so we do not have to. This trust is fragile, yet powerful. It allows cities to breathe together. It allows silence to feel safe. It allows darkness to become rest instead of threat. The medieval world never defeated chaos. It only learned how to live beside it without panic. And that lesson remains. When systems fail, when routines break, when uncertainty returns, we feel something ancient stir inside us. A need to organize. To control. To restore order. Not because we are weak. But because we remember, without remembering, what disorder once meant. So the world continues, layered with old solutions wearing modern faces. Emergency thinking wrapped in comfort. Fear transformed into habit. Survival disguised as normal life. And as night deepens, and sound fades, and thought softens, all of it holds steady. The bells no longer ring in panic. The watchmen no longer call the hours. The walls no longer face sieges. Yet their echoes remain. Keeping rhythm. Keeping order. Keeping sleep possible. You do not need to understand them. They are already working. So let the night pass gently. Let the old system stand quietly in the background. Let history do what it has always done best. Hold the world still, while you rest. And now, at last, the night is yours. The medieval world, with all its fires, sickness, wars, and hurried solutions, has quietly passed into memory. Its people are long gone. Their fears, their panic, their frantic fixes, everything that once shaped life from one sunrise to the next, remains only in the invisible structures around you. There is nothing to fear here. Only the quiet continuity of life shaped by history's hands. Every precaution, every routine, every habit. They are your companions tonight. Protecting you, guiding you, holding the world still. And as your breathing slows, as your thoughts soften, as sleep draws closer, remember this: the past survives not only in books or ruins, but in the way you rest tonight. In the way your world continues without your constant worry. Every lock, every schedule, every rule, every law, every system you trust, all were born from moments of desperate survival. Not genius. Not intention. Not grand design. Just necessity. Yet necessity has a strange kind of magic. It lingers. It becomes habit. It becomes invisible. It becomes home. Modern life feels safe because it is built on centuries of fear turned into habit. You move through it without noticing, almost as if the world itself is breathing with you. And tonight, that same quiet rhythm allows you to let go. The streets you walk in your mind are calm now. The fires are out. The armies have gone home. The sickness has passed. The bells have stopped ringing. The watchmen rest. The walls sleep. Even the dark has softened. It no longer threatens, only enfolds you. And you, too, may let go. All the lessons of survival have become a gentle scaffold beneath your dreams. Structures built in panic now hold the night steady. Rules born of fear now let you rest. The medieval world has done its work. Its people have rested. And now, so can you. The night passes. The world holds steady. You are safe. And now, sleep.